The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty street of Prescott when the three riders came into town. Their horses kicked up clouds of red dirt as they moved with the lazy confidence of men who owned whatever ground they rode on. The leader, a massive bull of a man named Colt Brennan, sat his saddle like a throne, his black duster hanging open to reveal twin colts at his hips. His face bore the cruel smile of someone who had never met real resistance. Behind him rode his brothers, Jake and Tommy, both cut from the same violent cloth but lacking their older brother's intelligence. Jake spat tobacco juice into the dust and wiped his mouth with the back of a dirty sleeve. Tommy kept his hand resting on his gun butt, eyes darting around the street like a spooked animal looking for something to kill. They had come to Prescott for one reason. Word had spread about an old drifter who had struck silver in the hills, enough to make a man rich for life. The fool had been careless, talking too much in the wrong saloons. Now the Brennan brothers had come to collect what they considered rightfully theirs. The old man sat outside the hotel on a weathered wooden chair, his gray mare tied to the hitching post beside him. He looked to be past 70, with silver hair poking out from under a battered hat and hands that trembled slightly as they rested on his knees. His clothes were simple and worn, the kind a man wore when he had nothing left to prove. Wire-rimmed spectacles perched on his nose as he read a letter, moving his lips slightly with each word. If you are enjoying this story, please let me know where you are listening from in the comments below. I love seeing how these tales of the Old West travel across the world. Now stay with me, because what happens next will show you why some men should never be crossed. Colt Brennan swung down from his saddle with deliberate slowness, his boots hitting the ground with authority. He had done this dance many times before. Find the weak, take what they had, leave them broken in the dirt. The old-timer looked like the easiest mark he had seen in months. The drifter looked up from his letter as the shadow fell across him. His pale blue eyes held no fear, only a quiet weariness that came from seeing too much of the world. He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his vest pocket. "Good morning to you, friend," the old man said in a voice barely above a whisper. Colt Brennan grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "Friend," he repeated, tasting the word like something sour. "That is not exactly what I would call our relationship, old-timer." He gestured to his brothers, who moved to flank the seated man. "See, we heard you came into some good fortune up in them hills. Silver, they say? Enough to choke a horse." The drifter said nothing, but his eyes moved briefly to his mare. She was a fine animal, probably 15 hands high with intelligent eyes and a coat that shone even through the road dust. Her saddle was well maintained, and the rifle in the scabbard looked clean and oiled. "Now," Colt continued, "we figure a man your age has no business carrying around that kind of wealth. Dangerous thing, having money when you cannot protect it. So we are going to do you a favor and take it off your hands." The old man slowly pushed himself to his feet, his movements careful and deliberate. "I appreciate the concern, but I believe I can manage my own affairs." Jake Brennan laughed, a harsh sound like breaking glass. "You hear that, Colt? The geezer thinks he can manage his own affairs." Tommy Brennan stepped closer, his hand dropping to his gun. "Maybe we are not making ourselves clear, old man. My brother asked you nice. Now we are telling you. Empty your pockets and hand over that silver, or things are going to get unpleasant real quick." The street had grown quiet around them. Shop owners peered through windows before quickly ducking back inside. A woman with a small child hurried across the street, her skirts rustling in her haste to get away. Even the horses seemed to sense the tension, shifting restlessly at the hitching posts. The old drifter glanced at his mare again, and something passed between them. The horse nickered softly and took a step closer to her master. The movement was subtle, but it brought the rifle scabbard within easier reach. "I told you, boys," the drifter said quietly, "I can manage my own affairs. You would be wise to mount up and ride on." Colt Brennan felt his temper rising. He was used to men cowering when he made his intentions known. This old fool was either braver or more stupid than most. Either way, the result would be the same. "Wise," Colt spat. "You want to talk about wise, old man? Let me show you what happens to people who think they are smarter than the Brennan brothers." He grabbed the drifter by the shirt front and jerked him forward. The old man stumbled but did not fall, his pale eyes never leaving Colt's face. The gray mare suddenly reared up, her hooves flashing dangerously close to Jake Brennan's head. He cursed and jumped back, drawing his gun instinctively. The horse settled down but remained alert, watching the men around her master with obvious intelligence. That animal has some spirit in her, Tommy observed with a cruel grin. Shame if something was to happen to her. The words hit the drifter like a physical blow. His shoulders straightened slightly, and for just a moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Something cold and deadly that had been sleeping for a very long time. "You boys should walk away now," the old man said, and his voice carried a different quality. Still quiet, but with an edge that had not been there before. "Last chance." Colt Brennan laughed out loud. "Last chance. You are giving us a last chance." He shoved the drifter backward, and the old man caught himself against the hitching post. "That is rich, old-timer. You know what I think? I think you have been out in the sun too long. Addled your brains." Jake moved around to the drifter's left side while Tommy went right. It was a practiced maneuver they had used dozens of times before. Surround the target, cut off escape routes, make them feel helpless. Usually worked like a charm. The drifter straightened up slowly, his hands hanging loose at his sides. His spectacles caught the morning light, hiding his eyes for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice was barely audible. "I have killed men for less than threatening my horse." The words hung in the air like smoke from a gunshot. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Colt Brennan threw back his head and roared with laughter. "Oh, this is too good," he wheezed. "The old man is threatening us now. What are you going to do, Grandpa? Beat us with your walking stick?" The drifter did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached up and slowly removed his spectacles, folding them carefully and placing them in his vest pocket. When he looked up again, his pale blue eyes were like chips of winter ice. "Do not have a walking stick," he said simply. Tommy Brennan grew impatient with the talk. He stepped forward and grabbed the drifter's arm roughly. "Enough jawing, old man. You can hand over that silver the easy way, or we can take it off your dead body. Makes no difference to us." The gray mare suddenly lunged forward, her teeth snapping at Tommy's shoulder. He yelped and stumbled backward, cursing. The horse had not quite reached him, but the message was clear. She was protecting her master, and she was ready to fight. "That does it," Jake snarled, raising his gun. "That animal dies right now." The sound of the hammer being cocked seemed to echo in the sudden silence. The drifter went absolutely still, his eyes fixed on the gun pointing at his horse. Several seconds passed, and nobody moved. Then the old man spoke, and his voice was like gravel sliding down a mountainside. "You point that gun at my horse, son, and you had better be ready to use it. Because if you hurt her, I am going to kill all three of you." Colt Brennan could not believe what he was hearing. This ancient relic was actually threatening them. Him, Colt Brennan, who had gunned down 17 men and never lost a fight. The audacity of it was almost admirable. "You know what, old-timer? I think we are done being polite. Jake, shoot the horse." The drifter's hand moved. It was not a fast draw in the traditional sense. There was no lightning quick snap of the wrist or blur of motion that left men gasping in amazement. Instead, it was something else entirely. Something smooth and economical and absolutely certain. His hand simply appeared at his hip, and the Colt Peacemaker that filled it looked like it had been there forever. Jake Brennan found himself staring down the barrel of the gun, his own weapon suddenly feeling clumsy and heavy in his grip. The old man had not drawn fast. He had drawn right. "I would not pull that trigger if I were you," the drifter said quietly. "Bad things tend to happen when people shoot at things I care about." The standoff stretched like a taut wire ready to snap. Jake Brennan stood frozen, his gun half raised but no longer aimed at the horse. The old drifter held his Peacemaker steady, the barrel trained on Jake's center mass with surgical precision. From across the street came the sound of a door opening. A young man in a deputy's badge stepped out of the sheriff's office, drawn by the commotion. He took one look at the scene and his face went pale as winter snow. "Sweet Mother of God," the deputy whispered, his voice carrying across the silent street. "That is Daniel Stone." The name hit the air like a thunderclap. Colt Brennan felt something cold crawl up his spine, but he pushed the feeling down. Stone was just a name, a legend. Stories told in saloons by drunk cowboys with too much imagination. "You are full of it, deputy," Colt called out, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "Daniel Stone is dead. Has been for 20 years. The old drifter never took his eyes off Jake, But he spoke to the deputy in that same quiet voice. "Hello, Charlie. Your father well?" Deputy Charlie Morrison felt his knees go weak. "Yes, sir, Mr. Stone. Pa is doing fine. Still talks about that time you and him tracked the Dalton boys through the Badlands." 23 days, the drifter said, as if he were discussing the weather. "Caught them trying to water their horses at Devil's Creek. Your pa took a bullet in the shoulder, but he never complained once." Charlie nodded frantically. "That is the story exactly like Pa tells it, word for word." The recognition was spreading through the small crowd that had gathered at a safe distance. Whispers started, growing louder as more people understood who they were looking at. Daniel Stone, the ghost of Tombstone. Heard he killed 40 men in Arizona territory. They say Wyatt Earp himself called Stone the finest gun hand he ever seen. Colt Brennan felt sweat breaking out on his forehead despite the cool morning air. He had heard the stories, of course. Every man who lived by the gun had heard of Daniel Stone, federal marshal who cleaned up 3 territories before disappearing into legend. But that was impossible. Stone would have to be ancient by now. "You are trying to run a bluff on us, old man," Colt said, but his voice came out rougher than he intended. "Daniel Stone is a ghost story." The drifter finally shifted his gaze to Colt, and those pale blue eyes held depths that seemed to go on forever. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of decades. "Been called worse things than a ghost, I suppose." He reached up with his free hand and pulled aside the collar of his shirt. There, burned into the flesh of his shoulder, was a distinctive scar. The letter D carved deep, with a smaller S beside it. Brand marks from the time he spent undercover with the Devil's Syndicate gang, earning their trust before bringing them all to justice. Deputy Morrison gasped audibly. "Pa told me about that brand. Said you got it when you infiltrated Black Pete Morrison's gang. No relation to Pa, just happened to have the same name." The brand was unmistakable proof, and everyone on the street knew it. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. People began backing away further, understanding that they were witnessing something that would be talked about for generations. Tommy Brennan's hand was shaking as he kept his gun trained in the general direction of the old man. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Colt, maybe we should listen to what the deputy is saying. Maybe we should just ride on." "Shut up, Tommy," Colt snapped, but his own certainty was cracking. He stared at the scar, at the way the old man held his gun, at the absolute stillness that surrounded him like an aura. This was not the trembling old fool he had confronted 5 minutes ago. This was something else entirely. Jake Brennan was the first to break. The gun in his hand felt like it weighed 100 pounds, and he slowly lowered it toward the ground. "I ain't drawing on Daniel Stone, Colt. I got a death wish, but I ain't crazy." The old man nodded slightly, acknowledging the surrender, but he did not lower his own weapon. Instead, he began to speak in that quiet, measured voice. "My name is Daniel Stone. I served as a federal marshal for 16 years. I have killed 37 men in the line of duty. Every one of them needed killing. I retired to these hills 10 years ago, hoping to live out my days in peace." He paused, his eyes moving from one Brennan brother to another. "But some things you never forget. Some skills stay with you until the day you die." Colt Brennan felt his world tilting sideways. He had built his reputation on being feared, on being the man other men crossed the street to avoid. Now he was standing in the dust of a nowhere town, being lectured by a legend he had thought was dead. "Even if you are Daniel Stone," Colt said desperately, "you are still just one old man. We got you outnumbered 3-1. The drifter smiled then, and it was not a pleasant expression. It was the smile of a man who had been in impossible situations before and walked away from all of them. "Son," he said softly, "I have faced worse odds than 3-1. Hell, I have faced worse odds than 10-1. The trick is not being outnumbered. The trick is making sure the other fellows know they are outgunned." As if summoned by his words, 2 more figures appeared on the street. An older man with a sheriff's star pinned to his vest, and beside him a woman in a simple dress who moved with the fluid grace of someone comfortable with violence. Both wore guns, and both wore the expression of people who knew exactly how to use them. "Afternoon, Daniel," the sheriff called out. "Heard there might be some trouble brewing." "Nothing I cannot handle, Tom," Stone replied. "But I appreciate you and Sarah showing up." The woman, Sarah, stepped slightly to the side, creating a crossfire angle. Her hand rested casually on the butt of her gun, but there was nothing casual about the way her eyes tracked the three brothers. Colt Brennan realized with dawning horror that the situation had completely reversed itself. They had come to rob one helpless old man, and somehow found themselves surrounded by three skilled gunfighters with nothing left to lose. Colt Brennan felt the trap closing around him like the jaws of a steel bear trap. What had started as a simple robbery was turning into a nightmare. He looked around desperately, trying to find an angle, any angle that might get him and his brothers out of this alive. "You boys have about 30 seconds to mount up and ride out of my town," Sheriff Tom Bradley said calmly. After that, I stopped being polite about it. Stone had not moved. His peacemaker still trained on Jake with unwavering precision. The years might have put silver in his hair and lines around his eyes, but they had not touched his gun hand. That was still rock steady. "Now hold on just a minute," Colt said, forcing his voice to sound reasonable. "We ain't done nothing wrong here. Just having a conversation with this gentleman about a business proposition." Sarah laughed, a sound like silver bells with a razor edge. "A business proposition that involved threatening to shoot his horse? That is a mighty interesting way to conduct business, mister." The gray mare had moved closer to Stone during the confrontation, positioning herself so that she could serve as cover if needed. The intelligence in her dark eyes was unmistakable. She understood the danger her master was in, and she was ready to help however she could. Deputy Morrison had drawn his own gun now, though his hands were shaking slightly. He was young, maybe 25, and had probably never been in a real gunfight. But he held his weapon correctly, and he had positioned himself to cover the side street in case the Brennans tried to run that way. Tommy Brennan was sweating freely now, dark stains showing under his arms despite the cool morning air. He kept looking from his brother to the three guns pointed in their direction, calculating odds that did not look good no matter how he figured them. "Colt," he said in a voice that was barely steady, "maybe we should do like the sheriff says. Just ride on out of here." "Nobody rides anywhere until I say so," Stone said quietly. "You boys came into this town looking to rob an old man. Threatened to kill his horse when he would not cooperate. That makes you thieves and animal killers in my book. Both hanging offenses in these parts." Jake Brennan had gone completely pale, his gun hanging loose in his grip. He had heard enough stories about Daniel Stone to know that the man did not make idle threats. If Stone said they were facing hanging, then that was exactly what they were facing. "We got rights," Jake said weakly. "You cannot just string us up without a trial." Stone nodded thoughtfully. "You are absolutely right. You do have the right to a trial. Of course, you also had the right to ride on when I first asked you polite. You chose not to exercise that right. Now you get to live with the consequences." The sheriff stepped forward slightly, his own gun drawn but pointed at the ground. "Daniel is right, boys. You came into my town, threatened a citizen, and made it clear you intended robbery and possibly murder. That gives me all the legal justification I need to arrest you. Question is, are you going to come quiet, or do we have to do this the hard way?" Colt Brennan felt desperation clawing at his chest. His reputation, his feared name, everything he had built was crumbling around him. If word got out that the Brennan brothers had been backed down by one old man and a small-town sheriff, they would be laughingstocks. Worse than that, every two-bit gunslinger in 3 territories would come looking to make their reputation by killing the men who had been humiliated in Prescott. "The hell with this," he snarled suddenly. "You want to fight, old man? Let us see if the great Daniel Stone is as fast as the stories claim." His hand dropped toward his gun. It was the last mistake Colt Brennan would ever make. Stone moved with a fluidity that seemed to defy the laws of physics. There was no wasted motion, no unnecessary flourish. His gun simply appeared in his hand, cocked and aimed, as if it had materialized there by magic. The shot came a split second later, the thunder of the peacemaker echoing off the buildings around the street. Colt Brennan's gun had barely cleared leather when Stone's bullet took him center mass. The impact spun him around and dropped him to his knees in the dust, his unfired weapon falling from nerveless fingers. Jake Brennan screamed in rage and brought his own gun up, but Sarah was already moving. Her draw was almost as smooth as Stone's, and her bullet caught Jake in the shoulder, spinning him around and sending his gun flying across the street. He went down hard, clutching his wounded arm and cursing. Tommy was the smartest of the 3 brothers. He threw his gun into the dust and raised his hands high above his head. "I surrender," he shouted. "Do not shoot, I surrender." The gunshots had lasted maybe 3 seconds. When the smoke cleared, one brother was dying, one was wounded and disarmed, and the third was begging for mercy. The famous Brennan brothers, scourge of 3 territories, had been destroyed by an old man and his allies in the time it took to draw breath. Stone walked over to where Colt lay gasping in the dirt. Blood was spreading across the front of his shirt, and his breathing was shallow and labored. Stone knelt down beside him, his pale eyes showing no emotion. "You should have listened when I gave you the chance to ride away," he said quietly. "Now your brothers are going to have to bury you in this dusty little town, far from home." Colt tried to speak, but blood filled his mouth instead of words. His eyes were already glazing over, the fight going out of him like air from a punctured balloon. Daniel Stone had been faster, more accurate, and more deadly than anything Colt had ever imagined. The sheriff was already moving to tend to Jake's wounded shoulder, though he kept his gun ready in case the man tried anything stupid. Sarah covered Tommy, while Deputy Morrison ran to fetch the doctor and the undertaker. Stone holstered his gun and walked back to his horse. The gray mare nuzzled his shoulder gently, and he stroked her neck with obvious affection. She had stood steady through the entire fight, never flinching even when the guns started booming around her. "You did good, girl," he murmured. "Sorry you had to see that ugliness. But some men just will not listen to reason." A crowd was gathering now, people emerging from their hiding places to stare at the aftermath. The whispers were already starting, and Stone knew that by nightfall the story would be spreading across the territory. The ghost of Tombstone had returned, and he was still as deadly as ever. But he also knew that this would not be the end of it. Killing Colt Brennan would bring others, men looking to test themselves against the legendary Daniel Stone. The peaceful retirement he had hoped for in these hills was probably over before it had really begun. He looked down at Colt's body one more time, feeling the familiar weight of regret settle on his shoulders. 38 men now. 38 lives he had taken in the name of justice and self-defense. Each one had earned their fate, but that did not make the burden any lighter. The deputy approached him carefully, holstering his own weapon. "Mr. Stone, sir, are you hurt at all? Do you need the doctor to take a look at you?" Stone shook his head. "I am fine, son. Your father trained you well. You kept your head when things got hot." "Thank you, sir." Deputy Morrison looked around at the scene, still trying to process what he had witnessed. "Will there be an inquest, do you think?" Sheriff Bradley overheard and shook his head. "Clear case of self-defense. 3 men threaten an innocent citizen and resist arrest. One of them draws on a peace officer. No jury in the territory would call that anything but justified." Stone nodded his agreement, but said nothing. He was already thinking about the letter in his vest pocket, the one that had brought him to town in the first place. It was from his late wife's sister, asking him to visit her family back in Kansas. Maybe it was time to take that trip. Maybe it was time to put even more distance between himself and the violence that seemed to follow him like a shadow. Tommy Brennan was loaded into the jail wagon, still whimpering about his surrendered status. Jake was taken to the doctor's office, his shoulder bandaged and his wrist shackled. They would both live to stand trial, which was more mercy than they had planned to show Stone or anyone else who got in their way. As for Colt, the undertaker was already measuring him for a pine box. He would be buried in the Prescott Cemetery, far from the Texas soil where he had been born. His gravestone would bear no legend of his feared reputation, just his name and the dates of his short, violent life. 3 months after the shooting, life in Prescott had settled back into its normal rhythm. The story of Daniel Stone and the Brennan brothers had spread across the territory like wildfire, growing larger with each telling. Some versions had Stone facing down 10 men instead of 3. Others claimed he had drawn so fast his gun appeared to fire itself. All of them agreed on one thing. The ghost of Tombstone was still the deadliest man with a gun anyone had ever seen. Stone himself had stayed in town longer than he had originally planned. The letter from his sister-in-law remained in his vest pocket, but something kept him from taking that trip to Kansas. Maybe it was the way the townspeople looked at him, with a mixture of awe and gratitude that he had not experienced in years. Maybe it was the way Deputy Morrison sought out his advice on law enforcement matters, eager to learn from a master. Or maybe it was just that he had finally found a place where his reputation protected people instead of attracting trouble. The gray mare had taken well to the livery stable, though Stone visited her twice a day without fail. She seemed content enough with the arrangement, but he could see in her intelligent eyes that she was ready to travel again whenever he gave the word. They had been partners for 8 years now, through good times and bad, and she trusted his judgment completely. On this particular morning, Stone was sitting on the hotel porch reading a newspaper when a young woman approached. She was perhaps 25, with dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and clothes that spoke of hard work and harder times. She carried herself with the straight-backed posture of someone who had learned early not to show weakness. "Mr. Stone," she said quietly, "I wonder if I might have a word with you." He folded the newspaper and gestured to the chair beside him. "Of course, miss. What can I do for you?" She sat down carefully, smoothing her skirts. "My name is Margaret Brennan. I am Colt Brennan's widow." Stone felt something cold settle in his stomach, but his expression remained neutral. "I am sorry for your loss, ma'am. I truly am." Margaret studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to read something written there. "You do not look like a killer," she said finally. "The stories make you sound like some kind of demon with a gun, but you just look like a tired old man." "That is probably the most accurate description anyone has given me in years," Stone replied. "What brings you to Prescott, Mrs. Brennan?" She reached into her reticule and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. When she unfolded it, Stone saw a silver locket and chain, tarnished with age but still beautiful. Inside the locket was a photograph of a young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. "This was Colt's mother," Margaret said. "She died when he was 12. After that, his father started drinking heavy and taking out his grief on the boys. Colt tried to protect his younger brothers, but he was just a child himself. The violence just kept growing until it consumed all 3 of them." Stone listened without comment, but something in his chest was tightening. He had wondered about the Brennan brothers, about what had turned them into the kind of men who would threaten an old man and his horse for money. Now he was beginning to understand. "Why are you telling me this, Mrs. Brennan?" "Because I want you to know that Colt was not always a bad man. He was a scared little boy who learned to use his fists and his gun to solve problems, because that was the only way he knew how to protect the people he cared about." Margaret's voice was steady, but Stone could see tears gathering in her eyes. "I am not asking you to feel guilty about what you did. He made his choice that day, and he paid the price for it. But I wanted you to know that somewhere inside that angry, violent man was still that 12-year-old boy trying to take care of his family." Stone reached out and gently touched the locket. "She was beautiful," he said softly. "I can see where Colt got his strong jaw." Margaret smiled through her tears. "She was the kindest woman I ever knew. Used to sing to the boys every night before bed, even when times were hard. Colt never forgot those songs. Sometimes, when he thought no one was listening, I would catch him humming them while he worked around our little farm." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, 2 people connected by tragedy, trying to find some meaning in the senseless violence that had brought them together. Stone thought about the 38 men he had killed, and wondered how many of them had mothers who sang lullabies, wives who remembered their gentler moments. "What will you do now?" he asked. Margaret rewrapped the locket and tucked it back into her reticule. "Go back to our farm, I suppose. Try to keep it running somehow. Jake and Tommy will be in prison for 5 years at least, so it will just be me and our 2 children." She straightened her shoulders with visible effort. "We will manage. We always have." Stone reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a roll of bills. The silver money that had started this whole mess. The fortune the Brennan brothers had come to steal. He held it out to her. "Take this. Use it to keep your farm running, to give your children a better start than their father had." Margaret stared at the money but did not reach for it. "That is what got Colt killed in the first place. Blood money." "No, ma'am," Stone said firmly. "That is what I dug out of the ground with my own 2 hands, through honest work and careful planning. Colt died because he chose to threaten innocent people, not because of this silver. The money itself is not evil. What matters is what you do with it." She looked at him for a long moment, then slowly reached out and took the bills. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Why would you do this? Why would you help the family of a man you killed?" "Because killing a man does not end your responsibility to him," Stone replied. "It just changes what that responsibility looks like. Your husband made choices that forced my hand, but that does not mean his children should suffer for those choices." Margaret stood up, clutching the money to her chest. "Thank you, Mr. Stone. I will make sure this goes to good use." I will make sure my children know that kindness can come from the most unexpected places." After she left, Stone sat on the porch for a long time, thinking about redemption and responsibility and the weight of choices that could never be undone. The silver was gone now, but somehow that felt right. It had caused enough pain already. Sheriff Bradley found him there an hour later, still staring off into the distance. "Heard you had a visitor this morning." "Word travels fast in a small town," Stone observed. The sheriff settled into the chair Margaret had vacated. "She is a good woman, that Margaret Brennan. Been through more hardship than anyone should have to endure. You did a generous thing, giving her that silver." Stone shrugged. "Seemed like the right thing to do." "It was. But it also means you are back to being a poor man again." Bradley paused. "I have been meaning to talk to you about that, actually. The town council has been discussing the possibility of offering you a permanent position. Deputy marshal, with full authority and a decent salary." Stone looked at him with surprise. "I thought you already had a deputy." "Charlie Morrison is a fine young man, but he is not ready for the kind of responsibility that comes with dealing with real trouble. The kind of men who might come looking for you, for instance." Bradley leaned forward. "The truth is, Daniel, having you here makes this town safer. People think twice before starting trouble when they know the ghost of Tombstone might be watching." It was tempting, Stone had to admit. The idea of having a real home again, a place where he belonged and was valued for more than just his reputation with a gun. But it also meant accepting that he would never truly be able to leave the violence behind. "What about the people who will come looking for me? The young guns who want to test themselves against the legend? We will deal with them as they come. Together." Bradley's voice was firm. "You do not have to face everything alone anymore, Daniel. This town stands with you." Stone thought about that for a long moment. The idea of having allies, of being part of a community again, was more appealing than he cared to admit. He had been alone for so long that he had almost forgotten what it felt like to belong somewhere. "I will need to think about it," he said finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need. The offer will stand." Bradley stood up and adjusted his hat. "In the meantime, we got word that a cattle rustling operation has been working the ranches north of town. Could use an experienced tracker to help run them down, if you are interested." Stone smiled slightly. It had been months since he had done any real law enforcement work, and he found himself missing the sense of purpose it gave him. "I suppose I could take a look at the evidence, see what I can make of it." "Excellent. Charlie can show you what we have so far." The sheriff paused at the top of the porch steps. "You know, Daniel, some men are born to be farmers or merchants or preachers. But some men are born to stand between good people and the darkness that wants to swallow them up. There is no shame in being what you were made to be." After Bradley left, Stone walked down to the livery stable to visit his mare. She nickered softly when she saw him coming, and he fed her an apple he had saved from breakfast. As he stroked her neck, he found himself thinking about the future for the first time in years. Maybe it was time to stop running from what he was. Maybe it was time to embrace the role he had been given and use it to build something good instead of just destroying what was evil. The ghost of Tombstone could become something more than just a legend whispered in saloons. He could become a symbol of justice, a reminder that good men with strong hands and steady hearts still walked the earth. The gray mare seemed to sense his changing mood. She nuzzled his shoulder gently, as if to say that whatever he decided, she would be ready to follow him down whatever path he chose. They had come this far together. They would see it through to the end, whatever that end might be. 5 years later, the town of Prescott had grown from a sleepy frontier settlement into a thriving community. The railroad had come through, bringing commerce and new settlers who had heard stories about the safest town in 3 territories. Children played in streets that had once been the domain of gunfighters and desperados, their laughter echoing off buildings that now housed schools and churches instead of saloons and gambling halls. Deputy Marshal Daniel Stone stood at the window of his office, watching those children with a mixture of pride and satisfaction. His hair was completely white now, and the lines around his eyes had deepened, but his hands remained steady and his pale blue eyes still missed nothing. The badge on his chest had been polished so many times the silver shone like a mirror. The gray mare was 23 years old now, ancient for a horse, but she still insisted on making her daily walks through town with Stone. She moved more slowly than she once had, but her intelligence remained sharp, and the bond between horse and rider had only deepened with time. The children loved her almost as much as they respected Stone, often bringing her apples and carrots while he conducted his rounds. Charlie Morrison had grown into an excellent sheriff, learning everything Stone could teach him about reading men and situations. He had married the schoolteacher 2 years earlier, and they were expecting their first child. The young man who had once trembled while drawing his gun now commanded respect throughout the territory. On this particular afternoon, Stone was reviewing reports when Charlie knocked on his door. "Come in, Sheriff." Charlie entered carrying a telegram and wearing an expression of barely contained excitement. "Daniel, you need to see this. It just came in from the territorial governor." Stone read the telegram twice, then set it down carefully on his desk. The governor was announcing the formation of a new elite law enforcement unit, the Territorial Rangers, designed to handle the most dangerous criminals across multiple territories. The unit would be commanded by a marshal of proven experience and unquestioned skill. The governor was formally offering the position to Daniel Stone. "It is quite an honor," Stone said quietly. "Command of the entire unit, headquarters in the territorial capital, authority that extends across 4 territories." Charlie nodded eagerly. "It is everything you have worked toward your whole career, Daniel. The chance to clean up the lawlessness that still plagues the frontier. To make a real difference on a scale you never could as a town deputy." Stone walked to the window again, looking out at the peaceful streets he had helped create. A group of children was gathered around his mare, who was enjoying the attention with dignified patience. One little girl, no more than 6 years old, was solemnly braiding flowers into the horse's mane while an older boy fed her apple slices. "Do you know what I see when I look out there, Charlie?" The sheriff joined him at the window. "A safe place where good people can raise their families without fear." "That is right. And do you know how many safe places like this exist in 4 territories?" "Not many. Maybe not enough." Stone turned away from the window. "The governor wants me to command rangers who will travel from town to town, crisis to crisis, always chasing the next outbreak of violence, never staying long enough to build something lasting." "But think of all the good you could do," Charlie protested. "All the innocent people you could protect." Stone smiled at the younger man's earnestness. "You are a good man, Charlie Morrison, and you will make an excellent territorial official someday. But I have spent most of my life chasing violence across the frontier, and I have learned something important. You cannot build peace by always riding toward the next war." He walked to a filing cabinet and pulled out a thick folder. Inside were letters, dozens of them, from people throughout the territories. Families who had moved to Prescott because they had heard it was safe. Business owners who had opened shops because they knew the law would protect their investments. Children who had been born and raised in a place where they never had to fear gunfire in the streets. "This is what real victory looks like, Charlie. Not the number of men you kill or arrest, but the number of children who grow up without knowing the sound of gunfire. Not the famous outlaws you bring to justice, but the ordinary families who can sleep peacefully in their beds." Charlie read through several of the letters, his expression growing thoughtful. "I never thought about it that way. Most people do not. They want the dramatic stories, the legendary gunfights, the larger-than-life heroes. But the real heroes are the teachers and shopkeepers and farmers who build communities worth protecting." Stone took the folder back and returned it to the filing cabinet. "My job is not to be a legend. My job is to make legends unnecessary." "So you are going to refuse the governor's offer?" Stone sat down at his desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. "I am going to recommend someone else for the position. Someone younger, with fresh ideas and the energy to travel constantly. As for me, I think I will stay right here in Prescott, making sure this little corner of the world stays peaceful." The letter was written quickly but carefully, declining the appointment with respect and gratitude, while recommending 3 younger marshals who would be excellent candidates for the position. When it was finished, Stone sealed it in an envelope and handed it to Charlie. "Wire this to the territorial capital, and then take the rest of the day off. That wife of yours is getting close to her time, and you should be home with her instead of worrying about territorial politics." After Charlie left, Stone walked down to the livery stable for his afternoon visit with the gray mare. She was still wearing the flower crown the little girl had made for her, and she seemed quite proud of the decoration. At 23, she was living on borrowed time, but she remained alert and affectionate, greeting Stone with the same gentle nicker she had used for years. "Hello, old girl. How was your day?" He stroked her neck while she nuzzled his shoulder. The children were spoiling you again, I see. A voice behind him made him turn around. Afternoon, Marshall Stone. The speaker was a young woman, perhaps 20, with the kind of determined expression that usually meant trouble. She wore men's clothes and had a gun belt around her waist, though she kept her hands well away from her weapons. Miss, Stone said carefully, what can I do for you? My name is Catherine Brennan. I am Colt Brennan's daughter. Stone felt that familiar cold sensation in his chest, but he kept his voice steady. You have grown into a fine-looking young woman, Miss Brennan. How is your mother? Ma is doing well. The farm is prosperous now, thanks to the silver you gave her. She used it to buy better livestock and improve the land. We are one of the most successful ranches in 3 counties. Catherine paused. She also made sure I knew the whole story about what happened between you and Pa. And what story is that? That my father was a violent man who made violent choices and paid the price for them. That you gave him every chance to walk away, and when he would not, you did what you had to do to protect yourself and others. She met his eyes directly. Ma also told me that you gave up your own fortune to make sure her children had a better life than their father did. Stone nodded slowly. Your mother is a wise woman, and from the looks of it, she raised a wise daughter. Catherine smiled, and for a moment Stone could see echoes of her grandmother's gentle face in her features. She did indeed. She also raised a daughter who knows right from wrong, and who understands that good people sometimes have to do hard things to protect innocent folks. Why are you here, Miss Brennan? Because I want to be a lawman. Like you. Catherine straightened her shoulders. I have been studying law enforcement for 2 years, practicing with firearms, learning to track and investigate. I want to apply for the deputy position that will open up when Charlie Morrison gets promoted to territorial sheriff. Stone was quiet for a long moment, studying the young woman's face. Her father's strong jaw was there, but tempered by her mother's intelligence and her grandmother's kindness. The combination was striking, and he found himself believing that she could indeed make an excellent peace officer. Being a lawman is dangerous work, Miss Brennan. You could be killed, or worse. Why would you choose such a path? Because someone has to stand between good people and the darkness that wants to swallow them up. She used Sheriff Bradley's exact words, and Stone suspected that was intentional. My father chose to be part of that darkness. I want to be part of the light that holds it back. Stone walked over to his mare and adjusted the flower crown that was beginning to slip. The old horse watched him patiently, as if she understood the importance of this conversation. There is one condition, he said finally. If you are going to work as my deputy, you need to understand that the goal is not to become famous or to build a reputation as a gunfighter. The goal is to create peace. To build a community where people can live without fear. That means being willing to talk your way out of trouble instead of shooting your way out. It means showing mercy when possible and using force only when necessary. Most importantly, it means understanding that real victory is measured not by how many men you kill, but by how many people you save. Catherine nodded seriously. I understand, Marshall. That is exactly the kind of lawman I want to be. In that case, Miss Brennan, I think we can arrange for you to start training next Monday. Stone extended his hand, and she shook it firmly. Welcome to the Prescott Marshal's office. As they walked back toward town together, Stone felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The circle was completing itself in the best possible way. Violence had begotten justice, and justice was now begetting a new generation of peace officers dedicated to protection rather than destruction. The gray mare followed them at her own pace, still wearing her crown of flowers. She seemed to understand that something important had just happened, and her step had a little more spring to it despite her advanced age. That evening, Stone sat on his hotel porch watching the sun set over the peaceful town of Prescott. Children were being called in for dinner. Shop owners were closing their businesses for the day, and families were gathering around tables to share meals and stories. It was the kind of ordinary, precious normalcy that he had spent his entire career fighting to protect. Tomorrow, Catherine Brennan would begin learning the skills she would need to carry on that fight. Charlie Morrison would continue growing into the kind of leader the territory needed, and Daniel Stone would remain exactly where he belonged, watching over the small corner of the world that had become his true home. The legend of the ghost of Tombstone would continue to grow in saloons and around campfires, told and retold until truth and fiction became impossible to separate. But that was fine with Stone. Let others worry about legends. He had found something far more valuable. The knowledge that his life had meant something, that his choices had made a difference, and that the violence he had committed had ultimately served the cause of peace. His gray mare lived for 3 more years, passing away peacefully in her sleep on a warm spring morning. Stone buried her himself on a hillside overlooking the town, and the children of Prescott gathered flowers to place on her grave. A small marker was erected there, reading simply, "Faithful partner and friend." Daniel Stone served as Marshal of Prescott for another 15 years, training a new generation of peace officers who carried his philosophy of protection over aggression throughout the territories. When he finally passed away at the age of 89, the entire territory mourned. His funeral was attended by hundreds of people whose lives he had touched, directly or indirectly. Catherine Brennan succeeded him as Marshal, becoming the first woman to hold that position in territorial history. She served with distinction for 23 years, never once drawing her weapon in anger. Under her leadership, Prescott became known as the most peaceful town in the American West, a place where disputes were settled with words rather than bullets. The stone marker above Daniel Stone's grave bears a simple inscription. He stood between good people and the darkness. It was enough. It was everything. If you enjoyed this tale of redemption and justice in the Old West, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that remind us why courage and compassion will always triumph over fear and hatred. Until next time, may you find the strength to stand for what is right, even when the odds seem impossible.